Hi, hello, my name is Mon, and this is a Forensic Files data analysis project I've been working on for a few months. Essentially, I just watched every episode of Forensic Files and recorded several data points about it so that I could compile all my data into this slideshow. The other thing I want to mention is that I'm recording this using Zoom, and I have had some issues in past videos I've done where the audio gets a little bit off from the visual, so I'm going to try to account for that, but that might happen in this video. Okay, before I start, I just want to show you my Excel sheet really quick so I can explain a few things. Basically, I have the episode titles, the year that it aired, the year the crime occurred, the crimes based on the categories I have over here, the subcategories or the causes of death based on the darker categories over here, the number of female and male criminals, the age of the victims based on these intervals, the number of female and male victims, and the state. Probably read all my categories over here, and a lot of them are really self-explanatory, especially if you've seen this show. Like, you know what murder is. But arson is exactly what it sounds like. It's someone setting fires intentionally. However, I also have arson as a subcategory of murder, meaning like a cause of death. That only came up twice, but it was specifically where the victim was unfortunately burned alive. And I also have bombing up here, and I also have bombing as a cause of death. When it's a cause of death, that's someone who sent a bomb to a specific person with the intent to kill that specific person, and they did die. Bombing as like a crime is either just one bomb that had no specific human targets, or it was like a serial bomber. So under arson, I do have this subcategory of cover-up, and that's basically someone who did arson with a purpose. These all went along with a murder episode, so just think like someone kills someone and then sets their house on fire to cover up the evidence, but they get caught anyway. And then disease, I have environmental hazards. Both of these are actually just mold, and I will get into that later. Then I have illness, that's like one person or like a genetic defect. And then I don't know why I called this contained. I honestly don't. It's just like imagine an outbreak of a disease, and like that's what that category is. But anyway, I'm going to get into my presentation now. There's a couple other notes I had for collecting data. Was if like a serial killer or even like a Black Widow or whatever the male equivalent of a Black Widow is came up, I just Googled their name to record the total number and ages of their confirmed victims, because those are the ones that can be like linked to that killer. A double state episode has crime scenes in different states, and so for all intents and purposes, a crime scene is a murder scene, dump site, or abduction site, and it could also be a disease that crosses state lines that did come up. The year occurred is the latest date that a crime occurred relating to serial killers and multiple crime episodes, relating to serial killers and multiple crime episodes. And if they didn't say the year that occurred and like couldn't find the case on the internet, like maybe they used a pseudonym for the victim, then I just recorded the year that the criminal was arrested. So now some just general observations. Every case from the 1970s was solved about a decade or more later, except for one, and that episode was Head Games, which, if I remember correctly, was 1974, maybe mid-70s. After season 4 ended, the show was rebranded from Medical Detectives to Forensic Files, and diseases, accidents, and non-violent others practically disappeared. These episodes are the ones that are harder to find on the internet, but most of them are just posted by accounts that aren't filmed as true crime. Every case from New York is upstate New York, except for two, Sign of the Zodiac and Touch of Evil, that were in New York City. Both these episodes were serial killer episodes. Many cases from Washington, and especially the Seattle area that were in the 1990s, mentioned the possibility that the Green River Killer did it, and Gary Ridgway was arrested in 2001. I don't remember any of the specific episodes. I do remember it came up a couple times. They did kind of like mention that in passing. And finally, in many episodes where a husband kills his wife and like stages the scene to make it look like an accident or suicide, he makes sure that the kids find her. I don't know why they do that. I got some random statistics just overall. So 85% of episodes were murders, but 91% of male criminals and 97% of female criminals were murderers. Another thing to remember about this is that of those 15% of episodes that weren't murders, a lot of them were like diseases or accidents that just didn't have criminals. 64% of all episodes were about the murder of at least one female. Of this, a minimum of 50% of episodes where a woman is murdered, and 32% of all episodes were about the murder of a young woman aged 19 to 34. And I wasn't correlating ages and gender, so I really only have like a minimum number. 54% of all episodes were a man killing a woman, as opposed to 5.4% where a woman killed a woman. You can probably extrapolate that to men killing men. And finally, 41 episodes involved 2 crimes being committed, and 36 had 2 causes of death, and 1 had 3. Now, as I mentioned before, when they rebranded the show to Forensic Files, they stopped doing disease episodes, and those ones are harder to find. So these are episodes that are nowhere on the internet, and therefore I couldn't watch them. So the episodes are 8 Men Out, All Charged Up, Honor Thy Father, Enemy Within, and Freeze Frame. So all these episodes are still included in my graph because I was able to find the names of the victims and Google them. Freeze Frame is on Tubi, but I don't know what that is, and you need a subscription to watch it. I also later realized that I actually have seen this episode before because I Googled a very specific detail that I didn't remember coming across this video of Forensic Files, and it came up, so I have seen that one before. And finally, Honor Thy Father is on YouTube on a playlist, but it is blocked in my country. I don't know if it's actually available in any other countries, but there is a Forensic Files Now article about it, and that's where I got the data from. Anyway, now we're going to get into the years that the crimes occurred. These are the cases that took the longest to solve. So when I say longest, these are essentially the coldest case. The coldest being marked for life. So a man robbed some teens, raped one, and killed 2 cops on one night in 1957. And it wasn't until 2003 that he was finally identified and arrested 46 years later. Unholy vows. So during World War II, Valerian Trifla committed Nazi war crimes, which in the episode they specified as a pogrom against the Jews. And this occurred during World War II, which was between 1939 and 1945, which was 55 to 61 years before it aired, and 39 to 45 years before we saw. This crime probably occurred throughout World War II, so I just recorded 1945 as the latest date. So I guess it was probably more like 39 years. But then Brotherly Love was about a woman who was killed in 1969, and her killer wasn't caught until 2003 after 34 years. And then Haunting Vision, a girl saw her mother get murdered in 1966. 33 years later, she told the police what she saw, and her father finally went to jail. In Voice from Beyond, in 1999, a barrel was found in a crawl space. A dead pregnant woman was inside, having been killed in 1969, 30 years earlier. And then in Paintball, a teen girl was murdered in 1962, and a local man was jailed for the crime a little after. He was retried in 1986 with new evidence that still proved he was the killer after 24 years. And then these are the episodes with the shortest time between crime and error. These are the ones that on my Excel sheet, the different showed up as 1 year. So starting with the Sniper's Trail, which was a 3-week series of attacks with the last on October 22nd, 2002. The episode aired on July 12th, 2003, a difference of only 296 days. The pair responsible was arrested 2 days after the last murder. And then X Marks the Spot was a serial killer who killed from 2000 to 2002 in Illinois. And the episode aired 1 year to the day after he was arrested, although I don't know when the last murder was, but I believe that he was arrested like not long after that. Then All Charged Up was a serial rapist from 1997 to 2001 who struck in Pennsylvania and Colorado, and he killed a young woman. The last rape, according to Wikipedia at least, was August 23rd, 2001. A man was later arrested, and the episode aired on December 10th, 2002, 474 days after the last attack. Also, side note, this is one of the episodes I couldn't watch, so I had to get my information from Wikipedia. And Cop Out was a college student who was murdered on June 5th, 2004. His killer was arrested just 6 days later, and the episode aired 543 days after his death. And finally, A Clutch of Witnesses was on January 24th, 2001. A man was murdered at a bar. The episode aired on December 21st, 2002, 696 days later. Furthermore, 16 episodes had only 2 years between crime and error, and every other episode was longer than that. And just some general things, so almost every time a case was from a new year, there was a difference of 2 from the year it aired. And 2007 cases never appeared in any episodes that aired in 2009. The first 2000 episode aired in 22. Basically what I'm saying is that like when the show started airing in 1999, I started seeing cases from 1997. That never happened with 2007. And 26 episodes were solved more than 10 years after the crime occurred. All right, and this is just a bar chart I've made of the years that the crimes occurred in. So you can already see it is skewed left because it being skewed right would be impossible because of time. And where you can see like just down here, these last 3 are the outliers that are prior to the 60s. And the bars that I've highlighted purple are the years that end in a 6, because I realized that they're actually the peak in every decade except for the 60s because it's so sparse, and except for 2006 just because like time, and it stopped airing in like 2010, so there wasn't a whole lot of time for them to cover cases from 2006. But obviously the 90s from 1990 until 1999 was probably the most common decade, and this other peak right here is 1991. So these are the two most common years. So these are just the 2 most common years, and all the years are very consistent up until like 1978, where there start to be gaps. And the show ended in 2011, and so the cases stopped in 2008. This is just another way of visualizing that exact same data. This is a box and whisker chart. So obviously it stops here in 2008. So the median year is 1995. The mean is 1993.5, and I also listed the outliers from the bottom up. So one of these dots has like 2 underneath it, and I don't remember which one, but the oldest is the Lindbergh Baby, then Unholy Vows, Marked for Life, Bitter Brew, Paintball, Dueling Confessions, JFK Assassination, Haunting Visions, A Voice from Beyond, Brotherly Love, and The List Murders in 1971. Now this graph is the year difference. So I took the year that the episode aired and subtracted the year that the crime occurred in. The minimum difference could only be 1. If it was 0, that'd be like impossible. Although technically, I guess like if you look at days, the Sniper Show was less than a year, but in terms of like just subtracting the years, it was a difference of 1. Okay, and then here the median is 9 and the mean is 10.7. However, I did do the calculation, and if you exclude all of the outliers, the mean is actually 9.7, which is a lot closer to the median. But then the outliers from the top down are Lindbergh Baby Kidnapping, Unholy Vows, Marked for Life, Bitter Brew, Paintball, Dueling Confessions, JFK Assassination, Brotherly Love, Haunting Vision, A Voice from Beyond, No Corpus Delicti, and Head Games, which I think was a difference of 28 years. Now, this is a crime show, so we gotta talk about the crimes that they covered. So these are just the crimes that I actually did record. So murder, arson, kidnapping, rape, disease, accident, bombing, attempted murder, bank robbery, other, and not a crime. Also, one of the crimes that like I didn't record that came up a lot was like robbery of like a murder victim. And like, yeah, robbery is a crime, but the more serious crime here that's being covered is the murder. Additionally, sexual assault and murder or kidnapping often, and I do this in all of my crime show projects, but if the victim dies, I don't record any sexual assault that may have occurred. And the same goes for kidnapping. I actually had a kidnapping category, but then all of the kidnapping was to rape the victim, so I made it kidnapping a subcategory of rape, but then there was a kidnapping that was not for rape. So I had to bring him back for that one episode, which was aptly called kidnapping. The other thing is that attempted murder, I made that category after the episode Frozen Evidence, which was about 70 episodes in. So it's possible that an attempted murder was missed when there was already a death. And then these are the subcategories and causes of deaths, or CODs, that I recorded. So for murder, I recorded shooting, stabbing, strangulation, asphyxiation, poisoning, blunt force trauma, bombing, arson, drowning, skeletal remains / never found, hit and run, and other. Now, sometimes, like, several of these things might happen. Arson had the cover-up / destroy evidence / framing. All those episodes also had murder in it. And then the serial arsonist category. And then accident, I had horrible accident and human error. The difference being that human error has a criminal. Disease, again, I don't know why I called it contained, but like outbreaks, illnesses, which was a single person or a genetic thing, and an environmental hazard. Both these were actually the same mold. And in bombing, I had the single bomb and serial bombing. And rape, I had kidnapping to rape. Not I didn't have a second category, but it either like was or it wasn't. This is just a tree map of all the crimes, so you can just kind of visualize like, so the crime, so the size obviously corresponds to like the frequency of it occurring. So murder is like the most common, and then these other ones just kind of not as common. Again, like arson and murder most often occurred together. Attempted murder and murder often occurred together, but there were a few that were just only attempted murder. And this is like a sand key diagram I've made. There are 438 crimes that occurred over 406 episodes. And I know this doesn't like add up, but that's just because sometimes were multiple causes of death for one murder episode if there was multiple victims. You see like shooting, stabbing, strangulation, and blunt force trauma are the most common. And then there are like several poison episodes. You can see I list all of them over here, and I'm going to talk more about that later. And then of the 24 where it was unknown, 15 of them were skeletal remains where they couldn't conclusively determine that it was shooting, stabbing, or blunt force trauma, because generally, depending on what part of the like skeleton you're looking at, those are the ones that are easiest to determine from looking at like marks on the bones. And then the other 9 have just never been found. Like through February 2023, when I'm recording this video, 9 have never been found. And down here, I also have the disease types that occurred, and I'm gonna get into those later too. So this is just a list of the others that occurred, that the ones that didn't really fall under any other category. So the first was a woman who abused her second child in what is known as Munchausen syndrome, which is abusing or faking an illness in someone else for attention on you. And then the pogrom against the Jews in World War II, the mass salmonelling of an Oregon town. During a robbery, a woman was bitten really badly. A woman was injected with HIV because of spite. And then past lives is an interesting one. In an attempt to fake his death, a man robbed a grave in Mexico to use the corpse of an elderly man. He put it in his car and set the car on fire, and then he also committed some fraud and embezzlement. All of that just is under the other. And then very similar episode is Grave Danger, where in an attempt to fake his death, a man robbed a grave in Texas and used the corpse of an elderly woman. He put it in his car and set it on fire. And then there was the woman who wrote threatening letters to herself, and the cybercrime against the company where all of their software was erased. One of the subcategories I had under murder was other, specifically just like if one of the cause of death didn't fit under any other category. So this first one's just a direct quote from the episode: blood loss from vaginal laceration. Then Munchausen syndrome again. This is the same episode, broken bond. This was the cause of death of her first child, and then the second child lived, which is why this episode's also under other. Being run over by a car twice, but not in a hit and run way. And then there was a negligent homicide due to a doctor performing surgery without anesthesia that resulted in the death of the patient, pushing the victim down a cliff that resulted in a broken neck. And then just a broken neck. It was unclear exactly what caused the broken neck, and then finally dropping a car on an unconscious man by removing the jack. And the episodes were just not a crime at all. So the first was calligraphy. A recluse was found dead after not having been seen by her family in decades. Her husband had to prove that he didn't kill her, and science proved that it was a seizure. Then a shot in the dark. A woman was found dead in her home with a gunshot wound to her abdomen and a rifle nearby. Police arrested her husband, but it was later proven to be suicide. And the other one was within arm's reach. A woman was found dead in her home with a gunshot wound to her abdomen and a rifle nearby. It was eventually determined to probably be a suicide. Talk about the accident types, starting with your horrible accidents. So a gun accidentally went off, killing a teenage boy in the firing range. There was a 99 car accident on a foggy Tennessee highway that killed 12. A woman fell down the stairs backwards in a suspicious manner. Once again, a dog attack. A house fire killed a baby boy, and arson was suspected, but it was determined to just be an accident. A barge hit a train bridge, causing the derailment of the train that killed 47. And A fire in a London underground station killed 31 when flashover trapped people inside. A boat went under in Louisiana and the captain drowned. Another house fire that killed an elderly couple. A Ford Cougar that started on fire and killed an old lady. I think they recalled all the cars that, like, the specific make and model that this happened with. And then finally, a man perished in a house fire. I had only 2 episodes that were human error, the first being Treading Not So Lightly, which I think I already mentioned, but man ran over a little girl in a hit, but she lived. And in Deadly Curve, 2 cars crashed into each other, killing 3, but both drivers are partially at fault, and that's what the episode kind of was about. They're trying to determine like whose fault it was, and it was both of them. And now I have the disease types. I'm going to talk about like the specific types of diseases that there are. So Legionnaire's disease is a pneumonia-like airborne disease that killed 34 elderly legionnaires in 1976. In Outbreak, thyrotoxicosis, which is caused by too much of the thyroid hormone, infected at least 121, but killed none in 1985. In Raw Terror, a young boy contracted E. coli from meat that caused hemolytic uremic syndrome. And fatal fungus was one of the environmental hazard episodes. So Stachybotrys mold, which was caused by water damage, killed 4 babies in 1994. Deadly parasites was waterborne cryptosporidium that killed 104. Foreign body was mad cow disease, also known as bovine spongiform encephalitis, that killed 178 in the late 80s. And specifically in people that contracted this, it caused Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome. Deadly formula, a woman was accused of killing a baby with antifreeze, but it was actually methylmalonic acidemia, which is a genetic thing. And then core evidence was a baby that died in 1996 after drinking fruit juice contaminated with E. coli. 13 other children got sick but lived. And then with Every Breath, the hantavirus, which is spread by rats, killed 13 in the Four Corners in 1993. In Breaking the Mold, a house contaminated with Stachybotrys mold made a man and his young son sick in 1999. And Sunday's Wake, a little girl died in 2000 after she ate lead paint chips and got lead poisoning. And now is my favorite part, the crime-solving animals, the pets that helps solve their people's murders or even snitched on their humans. So the first one was Cats, Flies, and Snapshots. A woman hugged her cat before she left for work and was then murdered. Cat hair was found on the suspect's things and he was arrested. Perfect Match. A woman was murdered and cat hair was found on some clothing left behind by the killer. It was white cat hair and her ex-husband had a white cat named Snowball. He was arrested as a result of the first cat DNA, and this is a picture of that cat I found on the internet. That's the ex-husband, I think. Then Chief Evidence, a couple was shot along with their dog, Chief, but the dog's hair helped catch their killer. And then Hair of the Dog, a man was murdered and his dog Keisha was taken and abandoned. Dog hair helps convict the killer. In Going for Broke, a man was murdered, but his killer's dog fur was found in some evidence. In Concrete Alibi, a young woman was murdered, but her killer's dog's hair was found in some evidence. And in See No Evil, squirrel hair was found on a victim's clothing, and they used DNA to match it to squirrel hair found with the killer. And now, the real crime-solving animals in a lot of murder cases are the bugs and the cadaver dogs, because forensic entomology they use to figure out how long ago the victim died, so that they can know when to look for alibis. And then cadaver dogs help find human bodies in the woods. I always wonder, do they know they're looking for dead bodies? Do they know that? Do they know they're dead? Because I mean, this one just looks happy, and it came up when I googled cadaver dog. I actually don't know if that's a cadaver dog. And we're going to talk about the criminals, the perpetrators of these crimes, and the criminals who were dead before they were arrested. So, and all of them were actually by suicide, and all of them, I think, were also by gun. And there are also several criminals who are already in jail by the time they were arrested. The episodes were Pastoral Care, Beaten by Hair, and Dressed to Kill, Once Bitten, Bound for Jail, No Corpus Delicti, and Soul Searching, and Smiley Face. These episodes I want to mention because they had a lot more criminals than a lot of the other episodes, specifically because of what I decided to dub a, quote, Fargo situation. Basically, Fargo is one of my favorite movies, but it's about a guy who, hires people to kidnap his wife. Kind of used the word Fargo in my Excel sheet as a shorthand of saying, here's a person who wants their spouse dead, and now they're going to go hire some people to kill the spouse, and so the spouse and the killers are all arrested and included as criminals. I think the most out of all of these was 5 in sheer luck. The other ones are House Call and Chief Suspect, and Family Interrupted was actually a son getting his family killed, which is similar. And also on the show, there are a surprising amount of cases where the killers were under 18. I mean, most of them were 16, 17, but still, they're minors. They're in high school. So in Death Play, a 16-year-old girl poisoned her dad. In Real Danger, a 16-year-old boy was involved in the attempted murder of 2 boys. I believe there were 2 other people involved, but they weren't minors. In Breaking News, a young woman was murdered by a 16-year-old boy. A teacher was killed by a man and his 15-year-old daughter. A 16-year-old boy killed his dad over not getting a new car. A 17-year-old killed his girlfriend and wasn't caught for 16 years. A 16-year-old killed both of her parents over her relationship with a 19-year-old. A 17-year-old boy shot his dad and his friend abetted in the murder. A 17-year-old boy killed his neighbor after watching her through a window from his apartment. A 17-year-old girl killed her mother with the help of her adult boyfriend. a 17-year-old girl and a boyfriend killed 4 of her friends. And the DC sniper attacks were perpetrated by a 17-year-old boy and a 41-year-old man. And the Buddhist monk murders was 2 17-year-old boys who killed 8 monks and 1 nun in one night. An interesting fact that you might not know is that there is one guy who was a murderer in 2 different episodes, and his name was Haddon Clark. When I learned that, I was like, well, what's the timeline of this? When did these crimes occur in relation to the episode's airing? In 1986, he killed 6-year-old Michelle Dorr. And then in 1992, he kills 23-year-old Laura Hodling. And then he went to jail for killing Hodling under suspicion of killing Dorr, although it's worth mentioning, they didn't have Michelle Dorr's body and they didn't know where she was. Beaten by a Hair aired in 1998. This episode is about solving Hodling's murder and identifying Clark. The episode mentions that he was a suspect in Dorr's disappearance, although they don't specifically mention her name. They just mention that he was a suspect in a little girl's murder. In 2000, Dorr's remains are found and identified as hers. Clark is identified as her killer. Then the 2003 episode Just a Kill airs about Dorr's murder. They mention his arrest for Hodling's death, but not the episode. Okay, and then in 2003, the episode Truth or Consequences aired. Donald Blom killed a young woman. In 2004, Music Case mentions him in passing as a suspect. He didn't do this second one, but both crimes were in Minnesota in 99, so it's easy to see why they may have suspected him. Second episode, they did also mention his confirmed victim, Katie Poirier, but they did not mention the episode, and I thought that was interesting because they actually only were like a few episodes apart, too. Okay, so now this is just the gender of the criminals. So you can see Blue is male. There were exactly 400 men arrested for crimes, and only 58 women are arrested for crimes. Also, one thing I want to mention, not unrelated to the gender of the criminals, a lot of these episodes I had to Google to get like information that wasn't said in the episode. And a lot of these criminals, I mean, obviously, this is an old show, so they're like a lot older now, but they're actually starting to get out of jail or they're starting to get paroled. Or a lot of them died in May of 2020. And it took me way too long to realize that they were dying of COVID in May of 2020. But yeah, a lot of them are either like just dead or out of jail now. This is a graph of the murderer's gender. So only those who were arrested for murder. So there were 364 men arrested for murder and 56 women arrested for murder. And there's a couple general things. So the most criminals in an episode was 7 in Payback. While they had varying degrees of culpability, all were charged and jailed for murder. Furthermore, the only episode with more than 1 female criminal was Payback as well, with 3 of the murderers being women. Only 3 women weren't murderers, and 2 aided in the faking of their husband's death. Those episodes being Past Lives and Grave Danger, which I already pointed out are actually quite similar to each other. And the 3rd woman murdered 1 child, so still murder, but Munchausen the other one, so broken bond. But every other woman who was arrested for a crime, I believe it was murder. And then 54 episodes had more than 1 criminal, and 46 of those had more than 1 murderer. This is some data that I found very interesting. I thought to make this because I was reading my AP Psych textbook and it was talking about how generally men are more aggressive than women. And so I thought, well, what if I find the cause of death by the gender of the murderer? And so that's what this chart is. So in the middle, these are just the causes of deaths I recorded. On the left, we have the male. On the right, we have the female. Also, this data does not include episodes with more than 1 murderer, regardless of gender, or episodes with more than 1 cause of death. But if you look over here at the percentages, you can see that the most common for men are shooting, stabbing, strangulation, and blunt force trauma. These are generally like violent, up close and personal methods of killing someone. And if you look at explosion, it may not be very high for men, but also all of them were men. None of them were women, because explosions is like a very male crime. And it's the same with arson. Like all of the arsonists were men, except for this one woman who set her house on fire to kill her kids. I can't say anything that's specifically about the unknown or never found only being men. It did find interesting that it was like more or less only men. There are a couple not counted because there was more than 1 criminal. But and if we look at the female, you can see that the most common is still like for both it's shooting. And I honestly think part of, and this is just my opinion, but I think that part of that might be because a lot of these episodes are from the United States and like Second Amendment, people just like have guns in their house and they can use that to murder someone. And it's similar, I think, with stabbing. Like people just have knives in their kitchen. People might have hunting knives even. If you look at the percentages of poisoning for male and female, it's like a lot higher for women. It's higher percentage than men and strangulation. What's interesting about that is that like while the men's most common method for murder was the up close and personal and violent ones, poisoning, while it's like slow and there's more distance between their murder and their victim, they're being less personal. Now we're going to get into the victims. So I recorded the age group and genders for all the victims, and so these are my age groups. I had fetus, baby, which was from 0 to 2 years, child from 3 to 12, teen from 13 to 18, young adult from 18 to 34, adult from 35 to 55, elder 56 plus, and also dog. Interesting, no cats were killed, it was only dogs. Also, 18 is inclusive of both of these. The difference was just if the victim's in high school, I put teen. If the victim's out of high school or like married, I put young adult. Additionally, no genders were recorded for fetuses since most were unknown. 2 episodes were attacks on pregnant women that resulted in a stillbirth while the mother survived, and both were recorded as babies. And in basically just for every there were 8 fetuses that were killed, so there were really just 8 pregnant women that were killed, and in I believe maybe 7 of those, the pregnancy was the reason for her murder, which is why I reported it. All right, I started zooming there, so I don't remember where I was. But this is just the ratios of the age groups to each other. So obviously these 3 are the like grown-ups, just over 18. And these 3 are under 18. The fetuses, I believe most of the mothers were young adults, although I believe one was a teen and one was an adult. And these are just the dogs. This is the genders of the murder victims. Now, obviously, I kind of expected this with a lot of male criminals. If you see why there might be a lot of female victims, especially with my stat from the very beginning that like 50-something% of episodes were a man killing a woman. Just about a 2/3 split, maybe slightly more 2/3 female. Graph is the total deaths by the crime. So obviously over half of the deaths are murder, and the second biggest one is disease. However, the 2 most deadly episodes were the mad cow disease and the cryptosporidium, which was 178 and 104 deaths, and those 2 episodes alone make up 84% of the disease episodes. There were just 100 people who died in the accidents, and 3 by bombing, 11 by arson, and the 3 that were not a crime. I have 2 slides of the victims that have never been found. I put their names because, like, I mean, if like I said a couple times, I filmed this in early 2023, and if that date sounds old to you, maybe like look these up because you never know when they're gonna solve a cold case. Like they just like the 2020s so far have been a really good year for unidentified murder victims. Like so the first was Innocence Lost about Melissa Brannon, who went missing in 1989 at age of 5. A man is in jail for kidnapping her, but if he says where she is, then he will probably be charged with murder. Missing in Time is about Carolyn Killaby, who was murdered in 1995 by a man she met at a bar. Root of All Evil, Charlotte Grabby was killed by her husband in 1981. There was evidence that her body was burned. They didn't find any bones or anything. Okay. Cold Storage is about Tracy Jo Shine, who was killed by her boyfriend in 1987. The case was unsolved until 1999. Buried Treasure was about Melvin Snyder, who disappeared in 1985 because of a love affair. Ring Him Up was about Shannon Melendi, who was killed in 1994 by an umpire who saw her working at a baseball game. Waste Mismanagement was about Glenda Furch, who was killed in 2007 after leaving her work, and Michelle Harris disappeared on 9/11 in upstate New York after threats from her soon-to-be ex-husband. Finally, these crimes had to happen somewhere, so this is just the case locations. And since this is an American show, this happened in the United States, the most being in Texas, with 45 episodes from Texas. 38 were in California, and 27 were in Florida. What was I saying? So these 3 honestly kind of make sense to me, because California has such a large population, and so do Texas, and also just the little states you can't see. There were 2 in DC, 3 in Delaware, none in Rhode Island, and 1 in Massachusetts. And the episodes that had none at all were Hawaii, North Dakota, Arkansas, West Virginia, and Rhode Island. And this is the international map. As you can see, most in the United States, 406, 7 in Canada, 2 in Mexico, 7 in the UK, 1 in Switzerland, 1 in Germany, and 1 in Romania, and 2 in Australia. And I just realized I did not mark the one that occurred in the Philippines. These are the double state episodes. It's a little messy, but I just kind of wanted to visualize it myself. So as you can see, most of them are like neighboring states. Maybe someone like the killer maybe just crossing state lines to avoid the police. And then this one is actually a disease. And deadly neighborhoods right here, Arizona to Connecticut, that's also a disease, but all of the other ones are murder. And some of them are like going long distances. I mean, novel idea, as I mentioned, North Carolina to Germany, that's a long way. And it's not just some general stuff. So 22 episodes had 2 states and 1 had 3 states. The one with 3 was a sniper's trail because like DC's is like I count as its own thing, but it's like real small. 1 episode crossed international borders with a man killing both North Carolina and Germany. And out of 406 episodes, there are 406 from the United States. This is because all of the double state episodes perfectly cancel out the international episodes with 23 cases from overseas. And that is the end of all my data in my slideshow. So just real quick before I end, the extraneous sources that I use to get further information from were Wikipedias of the victim or criminal, local newspapers from the time the crime occurred in. There's a website called Forensic Files Now. It's pretty interesting. They just kind of do updates on like people and criminals now, and also just the forensicfiles.fandom.com. It's like all the fandoms for every other show. Kind of gives you like a little snippet of what the episode's about. Okay, so thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, I do have several others on my channel. I've done Criminal Minds and I've done Hannibal. I'm planning on doing one for Dexter in the future, so feel free to subscribe if you want to see more crime show data analysis